Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Mustafa Mohsen, as you may or may not know, and thank you for clicking on this video, King, Queen, Monarch. Everyone is welcome here. Everyone. What I wanted to talk about today, well, let's kind of first of all, give you guys the time to kind of think about how this past week has been. I hope you guys had a okay week. I hope you guys have had a fulfilled feeling and a productive feeling throughout the week. I think it is one of the most achieving feelings a human being can experience, feeling as if they have succeeded at something that they wanted to succeed at. So, to kind of explain everything, I am not really having a good week, which is not a shocker. If you've been here, this is kind of a reoccurring course of events at this point. But I have received my uni grades, and needless to say, they were disappointing. I experienced a lot of stress throughout the exams. I don't know if you guys had noticed that throughout the past episodes that we had here, but I did experience a lot of stress, and a lot of the time, stress is such a dominating external factor that it causes you to. It kind of is a what is it like a it makes a normally smooth road kind of bumpy. It gives you extra like parkours that you have to like climb over. It gives you extra walls that you have to climb over. It gives you extra steps to do instead of just having a clear mind and being able to fully focus on what you're supposed to focus on. And I sadly enough learned this the hard way. I did in fact study, and I was in fact pretty, let's just say, I was pretty prepared for the exams, but I think, or it's not, I think, I know for a fact that mentally I just wasn't there. I went to the exams, and what I noticed was that my results objectively got better towards the end of the exam period or exam season, to say. And some factors that, or like key factors to sum up, are first of all that throughout the exam period, I had kind of tried to fix my sleep schedule because my sleep schedule was kind of ruining everything. It caused me a lot of stress. It caused not only a lot of stress, but you know, it caused things being more difficult than they are supposed to be. And although I was really prepared, and although I did kind of, although it was minimal, I did have the confidence to continue on and do the exams. But of course, and sadly, I have to say this, a lot of things kind of course through your mind when you are stressed and when you have such important things that you have to do, that failing an exam feels as if the end of the world because it's like the one thing that you're focusing on. Something that I also kind of thought about or should have more taken into consideration was the fact that putting myself or like giving myself such high expectations made reaching specific goals so much more difficult than they were supposed to be. It was unfortunate when I had received the results. It was first of all, it was kind of a feeling of relief because I had been anticipating not really getting that high of grades. I did, in fact, think of, okay, I might get some good grades here and there, but in general, it kind of was disappointing. I knew for a fact that I could have done better, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with the fact that I wasn't prepared or that I didn't study enough, because I know for a fact that that wasn't the case. I did study and I was well prepared. But I think, and I am sure of it, the stress, the lack of sleep, and the lack of confidence sometimes really did make performing on the exam itself, or even answering the questions properly, more difficult than they should have been. I, in general, am a really busy person. And what I mean with busy is that I always have something on my mind, and I always have so many things that I want to get done, which causes me to put full effort in every single one of those things. But mentally having the effort, but mentally getting burned out after a while, because when putting too much energy in the smaller things, or putting too much energy in specific details instead of understanding the broad themes, the broad content of it all, it does really make it more difficult. I also noticed that I was focusing too much on, remembering the details, which at the end of the day, it is important. The details are important. The details are what make said exams more difficult. Knowing the broad information of it all will kind of give you a way to perform on the exam, or a way to successfully answer the questions. But that's specifically where everything went wrong with me, myself, and I. It was mostly the fact that I had interpreted a lot of the questions like completely wrong. I had interpreted questions in my own way, and that is not good. That is absolutely not good, because I had, like, after the exam itself, I always had a feeling of, oh, I missed this, I should have done that. Oh, I remember this, I could have written that down. Oh, this is that, maybe I should have written that down instead of that. So, of course, not only did I just accept I couldn't accept my fate. I was trying to, after every exam, I was trying to look up the things that I could have done better. And I was like looking up the things that I did question, like that I did answer in a good way, to kind of give myself a feeling of success, I guess, even though I didn't really receive the grades yet. And at the end of the day, it's kind of a waste of time. Instead of just accepting it the way it is and fully putting my intention into the upcoming thing, or upcoming exam specifically, I had put so much energy into kind of proving myself right on so many questions. It made it difficult for myself to go on and go further with the following thing. To just kind of give you what I wanted to talk about today was not only the fact that, my exam results were disappointing. It was more so I had a realization. I realized that in moments of stress, I kind of start doing my own thing instead of doing the thing that I am expected to do. In uni, you should know in what way your professor expects you to answer a question, expects you to know the material. A lot of the times, it is good to study on your own and understand the material, and also study on your own, because everyone has a different way of studying, and it's purely subjective thing. Studying is something that you learn, it's something that you kind of have to strategize with, it's something that you have to experiment with, because at the end of the day, it's purely subjective. A study method is going to work for someone, and another study method is going to work for another person, and those study methods won't work for both of those people together. That's just the way it goes. And my study method wasn't necessarily the bad aspect of why I didn't really perform in the way I wanted to, or get the grades that I wanted to. Nor was my motivation, or my um, interest in the major and in the subjects. It was more so the lack of sleep. It was the lack of self control. It was the lack of confidence. And this is what kind of is the central piece that ties everything together. It's the fear of failure. And a lot of the time, the fear of failure does not allow you to fully give it your all. And what I mean with that is by having the fear of failure, by having this kind of already destined way of thinking, it's difficult to kind of actualize the positive things, actualize actual success. And it makes the road bumpy for no reason. And of course, it's easy for me to say this right now, because the semester has ended and I have to retake a lot of exams. But I'm not blaming myself for getting those results because at the time I didn't know better. It's also my first year. At the end of the day, everything is purely experimenting. It's not the lack of understanding the material, it's more so the lack of knowing how to answer and not answering the questions the way they were supposed to be answered. And I've also noticed that sometimes I start to get into my head about a lot of things. And when you're stressed, you start to question everything that you do. Definitely on the exams, for example. Everything that you studied and you thought and you were sure that was true suddenly becomes a question, suddenly becomes a vague memory. And it made things so much more difficult than it should have been. But once again, I will not blame myself for the way things went because I didn't know any better. I'm also still a human being. Mistakes are bound to be made. Mistakes happen. And the only way for you to grow as a person is to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and excel at, finding a solution for those mistakes. And luckily enough, I have, given myself the time to kind of think about everything and kind of plan out how I will be, doing these retakes and how I will plan on excelling on those. I've also noticed that at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter that much what happened in the past. Things happen and I will have to learn with it. The only thing that I know is that sleeping is going to make me feel so much more better, so much more confident, and actually make me memorize and remember all of the things that I've studied. I also noticed that I was so stressed about other external factors besides the exam, which is absolute hell. It is not fun. I was dreading everything at the time that I was doing my first exam at the end of May. It was such a feeling of everything is going wrong. I was thinking of so many other less important and minimal aspects that were so solely replaying in my mind and kind of taking over my way of thinking, my way of dealing with things, and my way of stress management during the exam. In general, I have been able to deal with stress better than the first semester. In general, I wasn't ever really that much of a stressed person. I kind of like growing up and in high school, I was able to deal with stress. I also had a lot of stress management. I was able to do a lot of things under pressure and focus on things without having to think of many other external factors and other things that aren't important at that time, you know, thinking of such small external things, thinking of events that happened are not things that you're supposed to be thinking about while doing something that is more important the minute that you're doing it. And sadly enough, it's not that easy to kind of escape those thoughts. Like I've mentioned many times before, I have borderline personality disorder, and it is something that is kind of difficult. Of course, borderline is not, it's not fun. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. It's also really stigmatized. There is this wrong perception of it, and it's really difficult. It is also really subjective in a sense. I have also, it's obviously it's difficult to deal with disappointment. Definitely because of like disappointment caused by the fear of failure, knowing that fear of failure actually made you fail and kind of manifested its way into your way of performing, into your way of possibly achieving something, by kind of making it more difficult and putting all these other obstacles on the way. It makes it so much more difficult. It does not allow you to have a clear mind. It does not allow you to perform in the way that you've wanted to perform. And disappointment in itself really is something really difficult for me to deal with. I have always felt like a disappointment. I have always felt like someone who was a liability to others. I've always felt like my presence in general was annoying to others, a disappointment. And I know for a fact that it has to do with past events that I've not yet gotten over. And I won't be expecting myself to get over it simply in a day, 2 days, weeks, months, years even. Things have happened. They have kind of made me the person I am, but they shouldn't define the person that I am. My feelings shouldn't define the way I take on things or the way I deal with things. Although I did put effort and although I did change my way of studying, although I attended all classes, I had put my effort into making proper notes, and which I did, and which I'm happy for, because now when I have to retake the exams, obviously all of the material is something that I've seen and studied before, so it's nothing new. The only thing that I know is that I just have to work on my way of answering questions and my way of just having self-confidence and dealing with stress, because stress is mainly the factor that kind of ruined it all for me. And I won't say ruined, because I'm going to take back that word, ruined, because nothing has been ruined. Everything, you get chances. And if the first chance fails, that doesn't mean that every single chance that passes by and every single possible better and positive outcome is necessarily unexistent. Most of the time, failing something will make you, in fact, push better, know what you did, and perfect it, and eventually be able to excel in the thing or at the thing that you've wanted to excel at. So that's really important, and that's also one of the main factors that I have decided to work on. Because at the end of the day, this is my life. I should not be worried about what others think, and I should not be worried about the way others perceive me. Okay, thought I was hearing noises. The most important part is the way I see myself, the way I put myself out there, and the way I excel at the things I want to do, and not the way that others will react to the things I have achieved. And sadly, I have learned that the hard way, because it will be faced with disappointment. I think it also has to do with the fact that I crave insane validation. because I can't really give myself that. And I know for a fact that the only person who will be able to fulfill your own needs and fulfill your own lack of validation or your craving to validation, although you don't really need it, it's not a need, it's something that you have wanted, it's something that you lacked, but it does not, you don't need it in the sense that it's the most important part of your life. It's not the thing that defines everything in life. That's the thing. You do what you're supposed to do, and that's that. But the validation of getting it afterwards, after achieving something, should not be the defining factor of actually feeling achievement or actually feeling productive. Because that's something that goes wrong with me and many others. And I know that is a fact. And I know that people who struggle with lack of confidence and a lack of pushing through and a lack of discipline, in a sense, do feel as if that besides you're giving your own self that validation, it needs to be coming from outwards. You don't need a grade to prove to yourself that you did good. You know for a fact that you had put your effort, even though you would have expected, for example, a 90%, but you got a 70, you passed, which means you know the material. And that's that. But actually having a better grade will not define whether you are a good person or whether you understood the material. Of course it does play a big factor. You know, if you don't understand the material, it is obvious that you won't get a good grade. With luck or with common sense you might, but at the end of the day, studying is the main aspect of it all. Being able to answer questions, eventually being able to pass something, is the most important part. But getting the grade afterwards should not define whether you actually excelled or achieved something. Of course, it is a way of reinforcement, or it's a way of reassurance. It's a way of getting this feeling of productive, because now you finally have the evidence that you did great. But at the end of the day, if you know that you studied well, and even if the grades were disappointing, the grades are just the grades. You know, they might, like, it might feel as if they define you, but they don't define your effort. They don't. Of course, if you studied a lot and you did great and you got a really good grade, it's important to also be proud of yourself, you know? But that 19 out of 20, that 90%, that 100% is not going to define you and fully make you the person that you are, you know? Getting a 13 out of 20 does not make you less worthy of a person of success, does not make you less of a person, or does not necessarily say that you have a lack of discipline. There's so many different outcomes that are kind of expected to happen, you know? All things have what is it called? All things have what is it called? Of course all things have solutions, but that's not what I'm trying to say. All things have a certain start. I just can't really get to the name of the word that I'm trying to use, but everything has a reason and everything has an explanation for why something happened. Everything goes back to your neurons, the connections in your brain, the way you are thinking of certain questions, the way you are perceiving things, the way that you are excelling at things, and the way that you are perfecting things, and the way that you are actually doing things. Everything has a reason. Having stress is going to make you perform less better. Sometimes people are able to function under stress. I am able to function under stress, but because the lack of confidence and the lack of reassurance, in a sense, it's going to make it more difficult to perform in the way that you have wanted to perform, you know? even the smartest person, even the person that had studied the most out of everyone, could still get a lesser grade. Why? Because they were so stressed and they couldn't really properly think and give themselves the time to properly answer questions and kind of let questions sink in. So a lot of things are determined also by external factors. You know, studying a lot does not necessarily directly mean that you're getting a good grade. Studying a lot does not necessarily mean that you are smart and you will be getting a good grade. Same that getting a good grade does not mean that you have put a lot of effort or did not put a lot of effort at all. You know for a fact that you had given it your all, so getting a lesser percentage or getting a lesser grade does not mean that you had put less effort. It of course could explain that maybe you should have put more effort. Maybe you realize that maybe I should have studied more, or I kind of was not feeling like it, but that's a different type of situation. I'm just solely trying to explain that the fact that the outcome of things does not directly mean the things that you have put the effort in. You know, some things just happen because they happened. Stress might come because of previous traumas that you have experienced, but that also doesn't mean that necessarily for the rest of your life you will be the person that will be stressed. Like I said, I'm the perfect example of that. I was able to deal with stress in the past 3 years so much better than I was able to deal with stress in the past month. If I start to work on that stress, knowing that that stress was mostly the aspect where it made it more difficult for me, and the fear of failure was the more difficult part of it all, and getting that kind of cleared out and fixed, it will most definitely, and I promise you, it will directly benefit you. It will directly give you a better chance of passing something, confidence, getting and being understanding the material, understanding the content, and eventually being able to perform in the way that you should be able to perform in, with confidence, with ease, and with no stress at all. Of course, nothing is everything is a spectrum, you know. Some things you experience a little stress, a lot of stress, that doesn't matter right now. But what I want to talk about necessarily is that once you start focusing on the things of why things weren't really going the way that they should have gone, you start to realize what things that you should work on and not fully change the way or fully give up. Because if I now have finally realized, and maybe I should have already realized that in the first semester, but because I was so stressed and still was dealing with the trauma that had happened to the beginning and the end of 2024, it was more difficult for me to perform in the way that I should have been able to perform. If I have 50% of my brain focusing on things and dealing with things and traumas and other things that I've gone through, and the other 50% putting its all effort into focusing and getting a good grade and getting and focusing and studying properly, I will not be able to fully give it my all because I'm already focused on two things at the same time. First things first, I have to focus on one thing, you know, to be able to fully give it my all. If I am so worried about other external things, if I'm so worried about stress, if I'm so worried about other things, it will be so much more difficult for me. It will be so much more difficult for me to actually excel at the thing that I had prepared for. Just the moment that I started realizing that everything was going wrong because of the fact that I was lacking confidence and I was focusing on so many external factors, like how I am supposed to get to the exam because I live quite far from my uni, how I am supposed to do the exam. I was so worried about already failing the exam before even starting the exam. I was so worried about the questions on the exam instead of actually just focusing on question per question. I was rushing through all of the questions because I was so worried about not having enough time, eventually causing me to literally have a blackout. And that blackout literally made everything worse because of the fear of failure, because of the lack of confidence in myself, and because of the lack of knowing that I had studied, I had put all of my effort into it, but yet I was so worried about external factors defining the outcome, I couldn't really take the outcome in my hands and actually mold it in the way that I had wanted it. I was so worried about things going wrong before they even had happened that I couldn't really let them happen in the way that they should have happened. I was so busy controlling the way I should have done. I was so busy controlling the way of how I am supposed to do it, how I will do it, and how it will have an outcome, instead of focusing on chapter per chapter, instead of focusing on finishing a class, finishing the studying, and eventually just doing the exam, because the exam at the end of the day is just the exam. All of the studying that I did beforehand and everything that I did before it, that's the most important part. I had studied. So for me now, the only thing that I can do is calm down and just ignore all of the external factors and focus on the exam. But if I'm so worried about other things, and so worried about I'm so worried about external factors, so worried about past events, so worried about all of these other things going on, how will I be able to focus on the thing that is right in front of me? If I start to zone out and focus on a lot of other things that I can't really do anything about and can't really control, why not focus on the things that I am able to control and I am able to perfect and I am able currently to do the way that I have to do it? But I was so focused on already failing it. I was so focused on already planning everything ahead, how I will get there, how I will do it, what would happen if I would have to go during the exam to the toilet, how I would feel, how I would suddenly forget a pen. I was so worried about all these other external factors that should not be even any less of my worries. I was so worried about those things, causing me to actually focus more on avoiding those things from happening, causing them to actually perfect, excel, and actualize my fear of failure. And that's like actualize the failure and actually project it and manifest it in the world, instead of just letting it be a fear and just kind of putting it in the back of my mind because I know that I will be able to get through it. That was the whole point. That was the whole problem with it all. Once I know and I am able to kind of deal with it, I have planned everything out for the retakes. I have planned the way that I will deal with the following things. I am focusing on how I will be dealing with stress management. Eventually, if I do all of those things, what is going to go wrong? Nothing. I have done everything that I should be able to do in the best way possible, and that's that. I know that I still did that in the past. I know for a fact that I had done things good. I know for a fact that I had studied. I had went to every class. I had perfected my notes. I had done everything that I could. But because I was so worried about the outcome of things, I couldn't really focus on actually the road along the way, the focusing on the process. I was so worried about actually getting the achievement, actually actualizing perfection. I was so worried about what the outcome was going to be, instead of just focusing on how I would be able to achieve that outcome, and how it's important to stay day by day, focus on everything the way they are supposed to be focused on, and not worrying about other external things too much. That's that. I hope you guys are doing okay. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys are feeling okay. Everything, everywhere, all at once. Mustafa out.